Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Sharon Underwood, and I'm against House Bill 2035. I'm a retiree from Kingwood, Texas. Most of my neighbors are retired, living on fixed incomes, where any emergency or extra expense makes us vulnerable to eviction. There is no grace period to pay rent in Texas, but some cities have ordinances that give tenants time to catch up. If passed, House Bill 2035 will lead to more evictions and increased homelessness. Those who would be hurt most by this bill are hardworking Texans and retirees who are already struggling with high prices at the grocery store and surging rental prices. Texans with children will be displaced and forced to live in crowded, overburdened shelters. The consequences of this bill, if passed, would be disastrous for Texas communities. According to Caring Works, homelessness is not someone else's issue. It's a ripple effect throughout the community. It impacts the availability of healthcare resources, crime and safety, the workforce, and the use of our tax dollars. Life is not always perfect, and things happen. Texas tenants deserve a right to cure before being thrown into the streets. The legislature shouldn't take away the protection where local governments have provided it. This bill would be bad for people like myself who have worked hard and paid into the economy. It would only take one emergency to put me behind on my rent. I don't think the legislature should ban local governments from trying to prevent homelessness. Don't tenants deserve a chance to make things right with their landlords and keep a roof over their heads? I implore you to say no to House Bill 2035. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. Members, any questions for this witness? Thank you very much. We show you registered as Robert Holley on behalf of the Texas Organizing Project, testifying against the bill. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You may proceed, sir.
First of all, good evening, Chairman and also Vice Chair and members. My name is Robert Holley. I live in Northwest Houston. I'm a neighborhood and community leader with the Texas Organizing Project, and I'm all over Houston organizing for over 7 years. I encourage the House to vote against House Bill 2035. Harris County evictions suits are soaring at record numbers at higher levels post-pandemic, caused by inflation, loss of jobs, low-paying jobs received after the loss of jobs, and many more adverse effects on the neighborhoods and communities. City ordinances help renters, landlords, and property owners to find alternatives to alleviate displacement via eviction. Harris County has 16 Justice of the Peace courts, all handling evictions with no consistency in standardized practices. I was supporting a family in eviction court, and the judge provided 5 extra days to allow the family and the property management company to apply for rent relief funding provided through the city of Houston. A week later, in a different precinct, the Justice of the Peace allowed a mother, daughter, and the property management to work things out within 1 hour. Or he would rule in favor of the plaintiff. City ordinances would allow opportunities for conversation and amicable agreements instead of forcing them through an eviction proceedings. The sad reality is that families, parents, and children are forced to live in their vehicles, wash up in public bathrooms after an eviction. Please support Texas families by voting no for this bill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Members, any questions for this witness? Thank you very much. we show you registered as Myra Joyce Nowlin, testifying on behalf of yourself against the bill. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You may proceed.
My name is Myra Joyce Nowlin, and I'm a tenant who was raised in Abilene, and I currently live in Representative Lambert's district. I am here representing myself and speaking against House Bill 2035. I have seen the devastating impact that evictions had on members of my own family. And as a member and volunteer for the Texas Tenants Union, I am concerned about homelessness and how easy it is for tenants to fall into it. I applaud the cities that are trying to prevent homelessness through local tenant protections. Texas tenants are fighting each month against evictions that will affect their households. Many Texas families are paying 50% or more of their income towards rent. Hardworking families are forced to pay higher and higher increases in rent, which leaves less and less for feeding their families, buying gas to go to work, and taking their children to school every day. Any emergency or unexpected expense will cause many of us to fall behind on rent and need a grace period to pay. Most other states already provide this. It is important to try to prevent evictions, not only to help the individuals and families facing it, but also for the taxpayers as a whole. It is much cheaper to keep a person or people in housing than to help them climb out of homelessness. Please don't stand in the way of local governments who have passed laws giving tenants a chance to get caught up on their rent and retain their housing. Please vote against House Bill 2035. Thank you.
Members, any questions for this witness? Thank you.
My name is Kayla Miranda. I am the mother of 4 children, and I'm a public housing tenant. 8 years ago, I owned a business. I owned a home. I was in a stable situation, and then life happened. My mom passed away. Our house was foreclosed on. My now ex-husband was arrested on an immigration violation and spent a year in federal prison, and me and my children were homeless. We lived in our car for a year and a half, and motels when we can afford it. And finally, we got a public housing unit. After I moved into that unit, they decided to demolish that property. I was on Apache Courts. If you guys watch any type of news, you would have saw that fight. And I was the tenant leading that fight. I followed their process. I followed their contract. I followed their grievance processes. I paid my rent on time. I followed their rules. I was still evicted. You go to the JP court, it's 3 minutes. The judge will ask you a question. I turned in my rental receipt showing proof of that I paid my rent, and he refused to accept them and still evicted me. I was able to keep my unit through an appeal process. And so for 8 months, the landlord did not get their rent because it sat in a court registry while we fought back and forth on whether or not I actually paid my rent. What had happened was they chose to pay my rent payments to false fees that I had already grieved and were supposed to be overturned and were not. So those rent payments disappear into the fees, and then they can evict you for non-payment of rent. Because when you go to Justice of the Peace and you file an eviction, if you're trying to file an eviction on simply fees, you can't do it. You can only file for non-payment of rent. So they take your rent money and make sure that they can evict you. It is a loophole that is horrendous. But really, I want to talk about what has happened since. I didn't stay quiet. I fought back. I ended up participating in several city programs, Right to Council, the 2022 Housing Bond. I am now on the Building Standards Board for the City of San Antonio, and I can tell you that this law the way that it is written, the way that it is only protection for big landlords, not little ones. The little ones can't afford the 8-month appeal process. The big ones, they don't care. So it's not in the language. The language, the way it is, it's just completely open to interpretation, and everyone's interpretation is different.
Thank you. Members, any questions for this witness? Thank you very much. We show you registered as Ben Martin on behalf of Texas Housers, testifying against this bill. Is that correct?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. And thank you, members. As you know by now, I'm Ben Martin, the Research Director at Texas Housers, and we oppose House Bill 2035. At a time when the eviction crisis in Texas is the worst that it's ever been, this bill would lead to more evictions, more housing instability, and more homelessness. Ultimately, it will lead to increased costs to taxpayers. Texas succeeded in preventing thousands of evictions during the pandemic emergency, but as relief dried up and protections ended in 2022, evictions in Texas rocketed back, and Texas is now in an eviction crisis. There were at least 270,000 evictions filed in the state of Texas in 2022. That's a huge rise from the prior 2 years, but it's also higher even than pre-pandemic years. In Harris County, which accounts for approximately a quarter of the eviction filings in the state, eviction filings were the highest ever recorded for every month of 2022. There are many negative impacts of eviction. Evictions come at great cost to individuals, to families. For instance, they have a negative impact on children's educational attainment. They break up the fabric and stability of communities, and ultimately taxpayers bear the cost of evictions for evicted tenants who experience homelessness and need support with rehousing or providing services. House Bill 2035 will lead to more evictions, instability, and homelessness. The bill is drafted in worryingly broad terms, but the apparent legislative intent is to prevent local governments from passing opportunity to cure ordinances. The opportunity to cure window gives tenants a short amount of time to make things right with their landlord, preventing needless evictions. And to access available resources, which we've heard from Texas Apartment Association they are in favor of. Also, we question if landlords are already working with tenants to avoid an eviction. I fail to see the problem of laws that essentially do the exact same thing, apparently in the same window of time that they're doing it. The longest permanent opportunity to cure law in the state is 7 days. Opportunity to cure periods are the law of the land in most southern states, in most conservative states in the U.S. In fact, as we've already heard, Texas is one of only 6 states in the country that doesn't have a statewide opportunity to cure. So taking the further step of preempting local governments from doing so, especially without putting in place a statewide cure period, is extremely uncommon and unusual. Representative Slauson argued that we need a uniform statewide policy so that landlords are not navigating a patchwork of regulations. But for the rental housing industry, a regulatory patchwork is industry standard in Texas and across the country. This is the cost of doing business in this industry. Committee members, if you pass 2035, you are assuming responsibility for dealing with the fallout of our eviction crisis, including increased homelessness. The crisis in evictions will continue to grow until we can't ignore it anymore at a state level. And I ask if you're prepared to take over the responsibility for the eviction crisis.
Members, any questions? Representative Cole?
Do you have any numbers or analysis about the homeless situation and eviction crisis in some of our smaller cities and counties?
So we focus more on eviction trends in numbers. What we've seen, the best data really available is in the larger metro areas. I mentioned Harris County experiencing historic highs. The statewide trend is historic highs, and we're also seeing evictions in Travis County, in in Dallas County, rising to meet or exceed pre-pandemic levels in various months. I could follow up if there's particular places that you're looking for. The Office of Court Administration has some data available on eviction filing records in every county in the state of Texas. And if there's particular places that you're looking for, when you zoom in at that level in lower population areas, the numbers kind of tend to bounce around a little bit more from month to month, but we would be happy to provide those numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair Niave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your testimony, you said that they essentially already deal with the quote-unquote patchwork of regulations. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so with multifamily housing production in terms right now of fair housing protections for different classes that aren't protected at the state level. There are other existing areas where these regulations occur at the local level.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Asut.
I think the question, though, is should they, as opposed to whether or not they do. For example, if one city in my district had a certain procedure on an eviction, they adopted a local procedure, a local rule, and then another city didn't, but they're in the same justice precinct, that justice of the peace during the eviction case, so I have to apply two different laws. Shouldn't a landlord have some predictability with the process that they're going to be subject to in the eviction process in our JP courts?
I believe that local governments in our state are in the best position to weigh the needs of landlords against the needs of tenants in their jurisdiction. As some of the members have mentioned, we have a very large state. We have a lot of different housing markets, and tenants in some of those areas are really suffering right now. I've mentioned multiple times that we're experiencing greater eviction rates than ever before, and stymieing our local government's ability to try to address that issue is moving in the wrong direction.
So is it your position that tenants should have different rights depending on which zip code they live in?
We would support a statewide uniform opportunity to cure period, if that's what you're asking.
But why would you if you propose local control? Shouldn't the locals be able to come up with that system and there shouldn't be a statewide, opportunity to cure law?
Well, we have not had a hearing for the statewide opportunity to cure, which we would support. If that law were to not pass, then a local opportunity to cure is the best chance for tenants to avoid an unavoidable eviction.
So why is it that a local entity is better situated to determine whether or not a right to cure law of any particular class, because we don't know what the exact terms are, but assuming, you've got one up for consideration. It sounds to me that you think that a city council is best situated to determine what right to cure law is best as opposed to the Texas legislature. Is that a fair statement of your position?
My position is that tenants deserve this right to cure, and that the few local governments, extremely few local governments in Texas who have passed local right to cure ordinances are giving tenants the best shot of avoiding unnecessary evictions and giving them a short window of time to access available resources, whether those are resources provided by the public sector or resources that they cobble together themselves.
Okay. But even if this bill passes, nothing precludes the state of Texas from enacting an opportunity to cure law. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct, sir.
Okay. If this bill passes, nothing prohibits the state of Texas from adopting any number of eviction protections that can apply to all Texans regardless of their zip code, correct?
I believe that is correct.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Representative Cole.
Are you aware of any members proposing an opportunity to cure?
Yes. Are you referring to a statewide opportunity?
Statewide opportunity to cure?
Yes, I believe that Representative Collier has proposed a statewide opportunity to cure.
We'll look for support on that bill.
Members, any questions for this witness? All right, thank you. John Woodley, Chair calls John Woodley. All right, we'll show him as not testifying.